If you're planning on doing Crime Busters for Division B and Science Olympiad, you need to be prepared to analyze powders. And so what I have here is a set of powders that were provided on the rules list that are found in the 2018 Science Olympiad manual. And I went ahead and underlined them here, but each one of them is here. The only one I don't have in this particular mix is sand, but everything else is here. You will need to be able to identify these powders, and there's a sort of a series that you're going to go through to figure this out. And according to the rules at a regional competition, which would include our Patriot invite and also the UNK invite, you could have anywhere between 6 and 15 of these to identify. And so you will want to practice these outside of the normal school day. Patriot period would probably work okay for testing some of these, but you can't rely solely on Patriot period when we're only going to maybe have 3 official meetings between now and our competition. So make sure that you can come in and do some of these tests on your own. So I thought I'd walk through what I would suggest when we're working through this. If you look at some of the rules and specifically the kit, and that's right here, each team may bring test tube brushes for cleaning, spot plates, which look like these. So this is the spot plate right here. And what the spot plates are going to allow you to do is put small samples of your powders into the spot plate and carry out some basic tests. With 6 or 15, you might want to just get good at writing down observations. So if you're coming in and you're practicing this, for example, this is calcium sulfate, I would make a table that has basic properties. And the first one is, what does it look like? So here we have blue crystals, sodium acetate, which is pretty much dried vinegar. So this is what you could mix with water in order to make vinegar. It's very powdery. And if we take a waft, and you don't want to put your nose in here and just sniff it, that could cause all sorts of problems. But if you just very lightly smell it, there's not much there. I don't see anything. There's no vinegar-like smell, so we can't use smell for that one. And most of these white powders probably aren't going to give much of an odor off. Okay. I'm not smelling anything, so I would highly recommend don't even bother smelling these things. Liquids, definitely, you want to smell them, but in terms of using the sense of odor, not extremely reliable. So there's a couple of things I noticed while going through this list. Gelatin and yeast are both brown. Gelatin looks like this. It's kind of a salt-like crystal, but has a brown color to it. Really high in protein. And then yeast, this is baking yeast that's used for bread. Much more granular. Like you can see, they almost look like little cylinders that make them up. So immediately, you could probably tell that. Yeast, just after opening this, definitely has an odor to it. Smells like yeast. It smells a little bit like bread. So that might be something, but I think those wouldn't be too hard to identify. This calcium sulfate has a blue color to it, and the reason for that is this particular compound grabs water, and when it grabs water, it's blue. Now, the instructor could mess with you a little bit, and they could make this white, and the way they do that is you heat it, you boil off the water, and this will turn a white color. Notice that it sort of looks like aquarium rocks. They might have this crushed up in a powder as well. So you might have to carry out additional tests, but if you see something like this and it looks like this, you're probably good to go with calcium sulfate. Now for the rest of these, they have different properties to them that are going to make them up. And this little document here, I pulled off of scioli.org for the Crime Busters, specifically for the powders. And the person that did this did a really nice job of just going through how you want to analyze these to figure them out. So let's say we're looking at like 2 powders, baking soda, for example, and Alka-Seltzer. Look a lot alike. Very difficult to tell. Well, what I can do is I can take a small sample out of here, put it into my spot plate, and then just start working from this set. So insoluble means that it's not going to dissolve in water. Fizzes, we know is an antacid. Alka-Seltzer is an antacid. That would actually end this particular test. It's done. Doesn't go any further. However, if this was baking soda and I put it into water, you're going to see it dissolve. So we know it's not insoluble. And it didn't fizz when water is going to be added to it. Next thing we do is test the pH. In your kit, you're going to want to bring pH test strips, and I have these here. So for those of you doing Crime Busters, you have to have a kit that you can bring with you. Always have goggles and always have gloves. Those are two things you absolutely need. You can also bring lab coats, which is always a good idea. That way, if there is anything that's messy in these labs, it doesn't get on these shirts that you guys work so hard to get developed and then end up paying for here. You'll put this into water, so the baking soda, for example, and just for the sake of seeing how this would actually work, I'm going to go ahead and put just a little bit of baking soda in here. So we add, and this thing's called a scoopula. It's a little metal scoop. You don't need much. You are just seeing if reactions are taking place. And then to this, we're going to need to add water. These will want to be part of your kit. These are disposable pipettes, so you can put different solutions into them. And then at the end of your session, they can just go into the garbage. So I'm going to get some water. Water will most likely be provided by your supervisor, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to bring a small amount just for testing. So I put some water in it, and it's pretty nondescript. Nothing's really happening here. Another thing that I would suggest is maybe have toothpicks with you as well, so you can mix these if you need to. Okay, so I've got a toothpick here. I'm just going to mix this up. And then I'm going to go ahead and test the pH of this. Anytime you're using a pipette and you need to do something new with it, you'll always want to throw it away and get a new one. This one has water in it, and I just mixed it in here. I'm going to grab a small amount of the water that's right above this baking soda here, and I'm going to place it onto this strip. I'm just going to make sure that strip is saturated. You might notice it's changing color. Now at this point in time, this pipette won't do me any good for any other tests. Okay, so I'm going to take a look at the pH. I'm going to match the color as best I can. Unfortunately, this thing's looking like a 7. If this were baking soda, it should have a much lower pH. Alright, so a much lower pH should be anything in here. And maybe, I don't know, I'm still seeing green, so 7 or 8. It's not super conclusive. The baking soda should be a lower pH. I'm just not seeing it. So if I'm not convinced, I'm like, okay, this thing's still neutral, but I don't think it's sugar, okay, because there's no crystals. And I don't see any crystals that would make up salt. The next thing I could do is get another sample. And then I can add vinegar to it and see what happens. If you ever made volcanoes when you were younger, you should get a reaction that looks like that. It should be pretty fizzy when we add it to it. So I have just a small amount of vinegar here. I picked up a new pipette. I'm just going to add a couple of drops and we're going to see what happens. Definitely fizzing. Alright, if that was sugar or salt, it would not do that. So we're looking at baking soda as being positive. So this is the overall way that we're going to figure these out. Is we're just going to start here, add water, and then basically see what happens. If this goes to here, then we just keep looking. What are our observations that we're making? If there is a substance on here that you do not see, you'll want to come in and test it and run through a series of tests, and you might need to add to this tree. But this would be a document that you can bring with you that should pretty quickly allow you to determine what your unknown powders are. You get to work as a team, and it would probably be a really good idea to have one person in charge and be able to identify powders really, really well. Now there's more to Crime Busters than just powders, but this is one that you might not have a lot of experience with, and it'd be a very good one for you to practice, and you can come in on your own. This would be something you could do before school, or something that you could even do after school, and just work through and start to learn. Now, moving forward, we'll want to look at some metals, and we'll want to look at some of the liquids that are listed as well. That'll be another video, and then eventually we'll work our way into hair, fibers, some of the plastics, paper chromatography, and then looking at fingerprints, DNA, shoe prints, soil, and some blood spatters. There's a lot in here, but in terms of the junior high division, these are a major scoring part of that particular activity. So it would be wise to spend the majority of your time getting this down, because you can guarantee it's going to be in your Crime Buster tests, and it's going to be the most points. So if you have questions, make sure you email me or stop in and talk to me.